So the South African Weather Service has issued a warning to residents living in areas experiencing rainfall lately. The most affected have been Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. There have been heavy and mild disasters recorded in these two areas in recent months. So we're asking this morning, has enough been done to empower local municipalities to handle such unplanned weather disasters? Let's bring in our two guests this morning. A climate change expert, Dr. Roland Ngam, joins us via our video link in Johannesburg. And Mluleki Nkosi is from the Emergency Services and Disaster Management National Working Group. He joins us via our video link this morning as well. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Mluleki, I want to begin with you this morning for a sense of how empowered municipalities are currently when it comes to natural disasters.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all your viewers. And indeed, disasters in our country are very, very prevalent nowadays, and due to climate change. And it is incumbent of us as municipalities to be able to be equal to the task. But the problem that we have is that constitutionally disaster management is a competency of provincial and national government. But certain tasks are devolved to municipalities to perform, but without also a budget to do so. And there's a perception that municipalities can be able to collect from the residents or the customers to be able to budget for disaster. So that on its own is not sustainable, as we know the state of municipalities. So it is a fact that municipalities are unable to cope with the situation due to also the skills, technical know-how, and so that warrant municipalities then to ask for funding from the national fiscus. As you know that municipalities only get 10% from the national fiscus, and hence it is becoming very difficult for municipalities to cope with disaster.
So are you also saying, Mluleki, that, given the kind of corruption, given the levels of corruption at municipal level, that this is unlikely to change?
Well, the issue of corruption in municipalities, we know that it is there, but the issue of disaster management, one has to understand that you have to plan against mitigating the disaster first. But what is happening now is that we only respond to disaster when it has occurred. So that on its own is a problem. We need to budget and have resources for disaster. And what is happening is that when national and provincial government come to local municipalities after the disaster or when the disaster occurs, even if they can pump money to municipalities, but the duration or time to deal with the disaster or to deal with whatever procurement that needs to be done to salvage the situation, it's very minimal, and municipalities do not have capacity to deal with those issues. For instance, if a disaster happens in KZN, then the municipalities will have to make an assessment of what type of intervention is needed from province. If they give you 100 million to build bridges, to assist the communities, that has to be implemented. Obviously, in 30 days, that won't be possible for municipalities to can be equal to the task to perform those.
Yeah. Dr. Ngam, let's bring you into the discussion this morning. And the issue around being proactive is an important one, isn't it? Especially because these adverse weather events are going to be happening more and more. So how do we become proactive as opposed to what's currently happening, being reactive?
Yes, Michelle, just to your point, the University of the Witwatersrand has just released a report of a research done by Professor Ngam, which shows that what we had in KwaZulu-Natal really recently was the most impactful disaster that province has suffered since 1840. And so you can imagine that these events are going to increase. Recently, Cyclone Freddy after a very active cyclone happening last year. This weekend we have been talking a lot about the coronation, but obviously for those who have been following the news, we've had flash flooding which has claimed about 400 lives in the DRC. And so all these events really are going to increase with the onset of climate change. The Horn of Africa suffering major drought since 2020. The South African government recently, I think about 3 years ago, put aside money for malaria because obviously the malaria belt is creeping southwards. About 300 million rand was allocated for that. Since then, very little has been done. And I think that is really because the eye has not been on the ball. It has been, people have been distracted by the electricity issues and so on. And that is why even following the flooding in KwaZulu-Natal, where everybody, including Minister Enoch Godongwana, was saying, this is something that should cause everybody to sit up. But unfortunately, electricity has distracted everybody. And it is unfortunate that not enough proactive work is being done so that we get prepared.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not just the risk to life. What we saw unfolding in KwaZulu-Natal last year, over 400 people killed in the flooding in the province last year. It's also the impact that adverse weather conditions, climate change will have on things like livestock production, on things like agriculture, Dr. Ngam.
Yes, really, and we can see that it is going to be a very rainy weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Northwest, Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng are all going to have a lot of rain this week. And the fact is that there is very little time between the previous rainfall and the rainfalls that we are going to see. And this really causes a lot of problems. Drainage systems not taken care of. The skills that we need, people living on slopes and in valleys, informal settlements and so on. And all of this really requires that proper planning is done, preventive measures, as well as really the skills necessary to prepare municipalities to deal with more frequent disasters. And unfortunately, with constrained municipal budget, it is very difficult to see how a lot of this is going to be put in place in a very short space of time.
Yeah. What can you tell us on that score, Mluleki, given the constraints insofar as municipal budgets are concerned, given how far we know we still need to go insofar as dealing with climate change, dealing with adverse weather conditions? Where are we now?
Indeed, municipalities are constrained financially, and the only solution is that through our intergovernmental relations and through all the structures that exist to deal with disaster, we should come together, bring all technical know-how, bring all the resources to the municipalities. Because the fact is, disaster is happening in municipality. It's not up there in the sky in a place called national or province. So the intervention should start now. We should not wait for disaster to strike. And municipalities on their own are unable to fund the issue of budget for disaster. So we need to make an overhaul in terms of legislation, in terms of funding municipality. That's the only thing that can assist, that province and national should come on board, and we should work together to mitigate against the disaster that is coming, because we know that there's going to be rain, we know that, and we know the areas that are going to be affected. So we should start now before the disaster strikes.
And it will be various government departments, right, that will have to be involved. If we just think of KwaZulu-Natal, people living in low-lying areas, homes that are on riverbanks and so on. So it's housing, it's infrastructure, it's a whole range of government departments that surely, Dr. Ngam, have to come together.
Yes, certainly. And, after Hurricane Katrina in the United States, the entire mindset completely changed. And I think that we need to have a similar kind of reaction in South Africa and have the kind of preparation that is going to have not just the equipment, the tractors, the airplanes, and so on, but also the kind of human resources necessary to react very quickly. We have seen in a very short space of time cyclones happening, heavy rainfall happening, and so there has to be a kind of national coordination. I think even higher than the levels that we're having now for the attention on electricity, coming and be put in place to ensure that the next time something similar to what happened in Durban happens, that we are prepared. Remember that even insurance companies are still struggling to catch up with all the demands that were placed on them after those floods. And so national government really needs to coordinate efforts.
Yeah, and hopefully we are looking to those international weather events to see how other countries, even though the comparison between two countries may be different, but what we can learn from how other countries have handled disasters of that nature. Dr. Roland Ngam is a climate change expert joining us for this important discussion, and Mluleki Nkosi is SELGA's chairperson for emergency services and disaster management. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for joining us.